How can you make something original when everything has already been said by Shakespeare or Kubrick or whoever else you admire? That's the question that has plagued artists for as long as there has been art. It's what literary critic Harold Bloom called the anxiety of influence. And on that note, I want to talk about Stranger Things. At first glance, this show feels completely unoriginal. It's 80s movie, the TV show, and is constantly referencing the works of Steven Spielberg, Stephen King, and others. Yet even though it lives and breathes the ethos of the 80s, Stranger Things somehow also feels unique. How did they do that? Last year, video essayist Evan Pushak, creator of The Nerdwriter, posted a video on his channel called Intertextuality, Hollywood's New Currency. If you haven't seen that video, the thesis of his argument is this. A lot of Hollywood sequels, remakes, and reboots use references to their own history as a frequent but unsatisfying replacement for actual drama.
My name is Khan.
As an example, he points to scenes like this one in Star Trek Into Darkness, where Benedict Cumberbatch's character reveals that his name is Khan, a moment that only works if you've seen the 1982 film The Wrath of Khan. He calls this cynical strategy weaponized intertextuality. Basically, it's fan service. Now, I'm not here to dispute the argument in that essay since I agree with it, but I want to expand on it a bit. You see, what the Nerdwriter is mostly talking about is self-reference. But as he also mentions, intertextuality as a whole is about how any text shapes the meaning of another. There is a world of difference between Star Trek Into Darkness referencing The Wrath of Khan and The Wrath of Khan referencing Moby Dick.
From hell's heart, I stab at thee. For hate's sake, I spit my last breath at thee.
So good! Now, Stranger Things is a form of intertextuality that you'd call a pastiche, a work that imitates the style of another creator or genre. It's sort of like the opposite of parody. Parody makes fun of common tropes, pastiche celebrates them. So Austin Powers, spy movie parody, Kingsman, spy movie pastiche. With Stranger Things, I think there was a huge risk in effectively doing the same thing that all of those self-references do, just with properties outside of your own canon. Replacing drama with, oh look, thing I recognize. If intertextuality plus cynically capitalizing on nostalgia equals weaponized intertextuality, then it would have been very easy for Stranger Things to be nothing more than weaponized pastiche. And that's becoming its own phenomenon with films like The Lego Movie and Ready Player One. We really are in the age of the pop culture remix. But the most interesting thing to me about Stranger Things isn't just that it uses 80s pop culture, but that it is so often about how we communicate and understand each other through pop culture. Mike, Lucas, and Dustin frequently settle arguments by using pop culture metaphors to communicate more clearly. Dungeons and Dragons, The Lord of the Rings, and Star Wars have given them a code of ethics and a communal language.
Do you even remember what happened on the Bloodstone Pass? We couldn't agree on what path to take, so we split up the party, and those trolls took us out one by one, and it all went to shit, and we were all disabled!
Do you seriously want to fight the Demogorgon with your wrist rocket? That's like R2-D2 going to fight Darth Vader. Nancy, maybe. But the Chief?
Lando Calrissian.
Would you shut up about Lando?
A language older generations are not fluent in.
You said he takes what?
Mirkwood.
Mirkwood.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of Mirkwood?
I have not. That sounds made up to me.
No, it's from Lord of the Rings.
Well, The Hobbit.
Using pop culture to communicate also ends up becoming a very literal part of the story as well. In the first episode, we see Joyce and her son Will plan to go see the film Poltergeist. Later, when Will gets trapped in the Upside Down, Joyce figures out a way to communicate with him through the walls, just as the characters in Poltergeist do. That shared experience gave them the tools they needed to survive. And that's contrasted with other pairs of children and parents who are completely unable to communicate. And just as the characters understand each other through pop culture, the references are also used to frame how the audience understands these characters. Eleven speaks very little throughout the course of the show. Instead, references are used to characterize her and foreshadow her arc. It's a very effective tactic. The idea is that you relate a character to at least two others from other pieces of fiction, and the audience will be left wondering which one the character will lean towards. Eleven is constantly compared to E.T., both by the camera and in the plot. She's on the run from the government, has supernatural abilities, and is hiding in the suburbs with a young boy whose parents are unaware of her existence. Major scenes include escaping on bikes and dressing up in a wig. The references are so heavy in this direction that I wouldn't be surprised if the original pitch of the series was, what if we made E.T., but E.T. was a young girl? At the same time, the peaceful innocence of E.T. is offset by references to two troubled Stephen King protagonists, Charlie from Firestarter and Carrie from, well, Carrie. Characters who are hunted and or abused, but who have great supernatural power that they use to cause a massive amount of violence, sometimes to innocent people. Eleven is a dynamic character because there is an internal contradiction within her that is articulated through intertextuality. The references paint a spectrum of possibility for her character, leading us to wonder whether her story will end with a tearful goodbye or massive violence. Turns out, sort of both. You can do this with a few of the other characters on the show as well. Is Joyce, for example, going crazy but for good reason, like Richard Dreyfuss's character in Close Encounters of the Third Kind? Or is she going literally crazy like Jack Nicholson's character in The Shining? In bringing new meaning to familiar tropes, the Duffer Brothers are able to overcome the anxiety of influence. In his book by that name, Harold Bloom argues that poetry, and for our purposes all art, is made in reaction to what came before. Artists are driven by the paradoxical desire to both create something similar to what our sources of inspiration have made, while also making something that isn't derivative. In order to work ourselves out of that anxiety, we have to engage in what he calls creative misprision, which we can take to mean as misreading. According to Bloom, artists need to willfully misinterpret their predecessor's work, and use that misreading to create something original. Stranger Things takes the most familiar elements of 80s films and boils them down to their most essential elements, fashioning a sort of mythic 80s that sanitizes both that time period and its pop culture. The characters are archetypes we've seen 100 times before, but care is taken to put a little twist on each of them. For instance, horror movies often have this weird puritanical attitude about sex, where the last survivor is always a virgin. In Stranger Things, she's the first victim. Bloom outlines 6 ways that he feels artists can overcome their influences, and there is a hierarchy to them. Now, I find these terms a little opaque and repetitive, so in brief, the 2 lowest forms are about revising the original work, making changes or elaborating on their arguments, while these 3 are all about purging yourself entirely from influence. The final one, however, is really interesting. Bloom calls it apophthegms, or the return of the dead, and it's when the poet stops running away from his influences and instead invites comparisons. In that contest, they prove victorious, overthrowing their precursor, doing what the precursor did, but even better than they did it, to the point that if people didn't know which came first, they'd think that the precursor's work was influenced by you, instead of the other way around. Since Stranger Things is the child of so many influences, I think it's impossible to put it firmly into any one of these categories. In relation to E.T., I think it's lower on the spectrum, since it follows the original closely but makes a swerve away from what the original did. And yet, the show demonstrates such a mastery over its influences that it managed to become a pop cultural touchstone even for audiences who haven't seen the films that inspired it. So for them, and perhaps for posterity, Stranger Things achieves apophthegms, in that we can look at the genre films of the 80s through the lens of Stranger Things, and not just vice versa. You don't have to reinvent the wheel to be original. Embrace and understand tropes, and then twist them in new ways. Intertextuality and influence are inescapable. That's why you need to master your influences, or your influences will master you. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Squarespace is, I think, the best way to make the perfect website quickly. I use it myself, and I highly recommend it. They've got award-winning 24/7 customer service, so if you need any help putting together your website, they're there for you. Although you probably won't need much help since it's so easy to use. There's no coding and nothing to install, patch, or upgrade. So start your free trial today at squarespace.com, and remember to go to squarespace.com/justright to get 10% off your first purchase. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more videos like it that explore the craft of writing in all mediums, then check out my Patreon page. You can support this channel for as little as $1 a video, and it really does make a difference. So a big thanks to everyone who has already pledged, and I'll see you all in a couple of weeks.